Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to this program where we discuss the noble life and the blessed seerah of our Master sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May the choicest of blessings be upon our Master sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his household, upon his companions, ila yawmiddin, and whoever follow in their footsteps in terms of hidayah and guidance. My name is Habib Bobat, and we will be together on the course of this seerah. So in our previous program, we discussed that the Prophet of Allah had presented himself to the various tribes that were coming into Mecca on the occasions of the trade fairs and on the occasions of Hajj. And he visited various tribes. The tribes that we mentioned previously was the Banu Fazara, the Banu Amir, the Ghassan tribe, the Banu Murrah, the Banu Hanifa, the Banu Sulaim, Banu Abs, Banu Kalb, the Kinda tribe, Banu Amir tribe, Banu Shayban tribe, and all of these people the Prophet of Allah had engaged with. And there's a point I want to start off with today's program, and that is the Prophet of Allah was presenting himself. He faced rejection. One is the rejection from the tribes that he was engaging with. And number two, the coordinated effort on the side of the Quraysh, where they were going around trying to pour water over the efforts of the Prophet ﷺ. And namely Abu Lahab, his uncle, and Abu Jahl, both were going around after the Prophet of Allah, and they were attacking his reputation, and they were trying to get the others to back off in terms of their support. Now, what happens is that in life, we will also go through the same phase. It does not mean that you are working to spread the message of Allah that everything will be cut out for you. It does not mean that everything will be smooth sailing for you. You will also face obstacles. You will also face difficulties. You will also face struggles in your path in the face of da'wah. So when you are giving da'wah, when you are inviting people, and in life in general, we acknowledge the fact that there will be days that will come on easy, there will be days that will be easy, and then there will be days that will be difficult in our lives. Here is the Prophet of Allah, the paragon of Allah's creation. Yet he's going around from one tribe to another tribe, from one party to another party, and he's saying, "Man ya'wini, man ya'wini, man yansuruni." Who's going to give me protection? Who's going to help me in my mission? Who's going to give me protection? This is the Nabi of Allah at a point of vulnerability. The Prophet of Allah is presenting himself to the various tribes, and is facing rejection, and is facing hostility from his own people, and yet he is continuing with his mission. In life, when we start to do anything good, whether it's in terms of the work that we do or in terms of deen, we will face opposition, we will face rejection, we will face hostility, but we have to continue. We have to continue just as the Prophet of Allah continued, and he remained resolute, and he was persistent, and he remained firm on his position, and he continued with his effort. So, whilst he was presenting himself to the various tribes, he came across a small group of people from Yathrib, from Medina. Remember, Medina was not known as Medina before Islam. Medina was known as Yathrib. Medina was known as Yathrib. So, there were 6 people. How many? 6 people that were there at the time of Hajj, and they were in Mina. And in Mina there is a location called Aqaba. There's a location called Aqaba. Now each tribe had different spots where they would camp at the time of Hajj. As we have nowadays also, you have different countries camping at different spots. and as it is managed today by the authorities, likewise in that time also people had allocated places when they would come for Hajj. So the Prophet of Allah asked them, Manil Qawm, who are you people? You know, these 6 people, who are you people? So they said, we are the Khazraj. And the Prophet of Allah thought, are you the Khazraj, the allies of the Jews? And they said, yes, we are the Khazraj, the allies of the Jews from Yathrib. So the Prophet ﷺ sat down and he started engaging with the people of Yathrib. And the Prophet of Allah presented the message of Islam. And the Prophet of Allah ﷺ invited them to the deen. And they had accepted Islam. And the reason why the people of Medina were so open to the message of Islam is because they were familiar with the concept of a Rasul, of a Nabi, of a Prophet, and they were familiar with the concept of a heavenly book. Why? Because of the Jews. We know that there were 3 major tribes, 3 huge tribes that resided in Medina and around Medina. And the people of Medina, like the people of Mecca, were also polytheists, that is the non-Jewish tribes like the Aus and the Khazraj and the others. But because the Jews were a people of the book, they followed the book of Allah that was revealed to Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, the Torah, and they also followed in Musa alayhi salatu wasalam. So they were familiar with the Jews because they followed the book, they followed the Prophet, they had worship rituals where they would worship Allah in their own way as taught to them by Musa alayhi salatu wasalam. So because of this exposure, because you must know, the Arabs by and large did not follow any prophet. And they had no book, no divine book in the Arabian Peninsula. The Jews are from outside, they are not from Arabia. That is a different story for another day. But the Jews that settled in Arabia, because of this, the tribes of Medina became familiar with the concept of a prophet, with the concept of a book. That's number 1. Number 2, the Jews would always threaten the Aus and the Khazraj, the 2 warring tribes in Medina, and the Jews would say, we are waiting for the Prophet to come in Arabia. When he emerges, we will join his ranks, and jointly we will fight you and annihilate you and overpower you, the Aus and the Khazraj. So they were threatened many times in Medina. Now when the Prophet of Allah is interacting with the people of Yathrib, the people of Medina in Mecca, they already said to one another, hey, you know what, man, this is what the Jews have been talking about all along. وَكَانُوا مِن قَبْلِ يَسْتَفْتِحُونَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. The Quran speaks about this, that the Jews would continuously threaten the people of Medina with the final prophet. فَلَمَّا جَاءَهُمْ مَا عَرَفُوا بِهِ كَفَرُوا. When the Prophet of Allah actually came, then the Jews did not believe in him. There were those who believed in him, and then there were those who did not believe in him. So the Aus and the Khazraj tribe, they were aware of the concept of Nubuwah, and they were aware of the concept of a prophet and the concept of a book. So when the Prophet of Allah invited them at the time of Hajj, they were already familiar with the message, and they accepted Islam. So this is now interaction starting with the people of Medina. It didn't just happen out of the blue. It happened slowly and slowly and slowly. And so the first discussion takes place with the people of Yathrib, the 6 people. These are the 6 people that are coming, and the Prophet of Allah is engaging with them. There's no allegiance that takes place here on the first meeting. The Prophet of Allah just presents the message of Islam to them. They take the message, they go back to Medina. They go back to Yathrib. When they go back to Yathrib, they continue speaking about this new religion that they found out about. They continue preaching about Islam to their people. And within a year, everybody in Medina gets to know about Islam. They are now familiar with the message of the Prophet ﷺ. And so, the following year, 12 people come to meet the Prophet of Allah on a formal basis. And this meeting is known as Al-Aqabatul Ula, the first meeting, because the meeting prior to this with the 6 people was just an informal engagement, and the Prophet of Allah presented the message. But there was no allegiance, there was nothing formal after that ensued. These 6 people went back to Medina, they continued to talk about the new religion, people became aware. The following year, 12 people came to meet the Prophet of Allah, also on the occasion of Hajj, and also in Mina at a place called Aqaba. And this first meeting, this formal meeting, was known as Al-Aqabatul Ula. When we return, we continue with the story. Welcome back to the program. We are busy discussing the efforts of the Prophet ﷺ in him presenting himself to the various tribes. We are at a point where the Prophet of Allah ﷺ now started discussions with the people of Yathrib, the people of Medina. The first meeting, 6 people accepted Islam. From amongst them, the famous was Uqba ibn Amir radiyallahu ta'ala an, and Jabir ibn Abdullah. Jabir ibn Abdullah, famous Sahabi from the Ansar. Uqba ibn Amir, famous Sahabi from the Ansar. These people went back to Medina, they continued speaking and created awareness around Islam. 1 year later, they came with 12 people, 10 from the Khazraj and 2 from the Aus tribe. Now, I need to explain to you the context of Medina and the context of the Aus and the Khazraj. The Aus and the Khazraj, these were 2 warring tribes. They fought one another for a very long time. And they had many wars and many battles. And one of the decisive battles that they fought was the Battle of Bu'ath. The Battle of Bu'ath. And in this battle, many of the leaders on both sides, the Aus and the Khazraj, were killed. Many of the chieftains, which created a vacuum. And a new generation of leaders emerged on the Aus and the Khazraj side. But this new generation of leaders were young, and they were tired of fighting, and they wanted a stop to this. And they were looking for somebody who could unite the 2 tribes, the Aus and the Khazraj. And the Quran speaks about this, that how you were on the brink of destruction and Allah saved you. فَأَصْبَحْتُمْ بِنِعْمَتِهِ إِخْوَانًا وَكُنْتُمْ عَلَى شَفَا حُفْرَةٍ مِّنَ النَّارِ فَأَنْقَذَكُم مِّنْهَا. You were on the brink of destruction and Allah saved you and made you brothers. So, when they came, the 12 people, 10 from the Khazraj, 2 from the Aus. This means that there was positive development in Medina the year before. And they were willing to bring about change and reform amongst the 2 tribes, the Aus and the Khazraj. Both of them had lost a lot of their leaders. They needed a new ideology. They needed a new trajectory for their own tribes to survive and to move forward. So when they came to the Prophet of Allah, they met in Mina, they met in the cover of the night, and they met at a place called Aqaba. So the Prophet ﷺ spoke to these people, 12 men and 2 ladies, Asma bint Amir and Nusayba bint Ka'b radiyallahu ta'ala anha. 2 ladies, 12 men. They engaged with the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Prophet of Allah at this moment for the first time took an allegiance. And this allegiance was Bay'atun Nisa. Bay'atun Nisa means the allegiance of the women. What was the allegiance of the women? It is mentioned in the Quran, Allah nushrika billahi shay'a wala nasriq, that we will not ascribe partners unto Allah, we will not steal, we will not fornicate, we will not slander. All of these, basically a covenant that the Prophet of Allah made with them, that you will worship Allah, you will be upright in your character, you will continue to do that which is right. But at this moment, there's no pledge of political asylum and there's no pledge of military backing for the Prophet ﷺ. It's still Dini engagements. Now, when these 12 people came this time round, the Prophet of Allah appointed Mus'ab radiallahu ta'ala anhu as a teacher. Because they requested a teacher, they said, O Nabi of Allah, appoint a teacher that can come back with us to Medina, who can do da'wah, who can invite people towards Islam, and it will be beneficial for all of us. So the Prophet of Allah appointed Mus'ab. Mus'ab was a youngster, a young man, but well versed, well established, and very knowledgeable. He was known in Medina as Al-Muqri, and he was known as the one who taught people Islam. So Mus'ab radiallahu ta'ala anhu was known as Al-Muqri and Al-Imam lis-Salah. The Prophet of Allah told Mus'ab, go back to Medina with the people of Medina, the people of Yathrib. At this point, they are not known as Al-Ansar. They will become known at a later stage. At this stage, they are still known as the people of Yathrib and not Medina. So they go back to Medina. And when they go back to Medina, Mus'ab ibn Umair continues to invite people, and he is doing da'wah work amongst the people of Medina. And within the span of 1 year, at least 200 plus people accept Islam at his hands. Subhanallah. So there's positive change taking place in Medina. There's still no talk of migration. There's still no talk of political asylum. At this stage, 12 people come to Mecca, they engage with the Prophet of Allah, they take a covenant with him for worship and all of that, and they come back to Medina with Mus'ab ibn Umair, a teacher that the Prophet of Allah had appointed. Mus'ab ibn Umair was very charismatic, he was very eloquent, he had a beautiful way in which he would read Quran, and he was the Imam of Salah for the Aus and the Khazraj. Remember, these are two warring tribes. And it was such a brilliant move that the Prophet of Allah appointed him as the Imam. Because the Aus and the Khazraj are new into Islam, and there were still traces of animosity amongst them because of previous wounds. They were warring tribes after all. So in order to bring about reconciliation and to keep both parties happy and to keep them at a good distance, the Prophet of Allah appointed Mus'ab ibn Umair as the leader for Salah. And he continued, Mus'ab ibn Umair stayed in the house of a Madani man known by the name of As'ad ibn Zurara radiyallahu ta'ala an. As'ad ibn Zurara had a big home and he had an orchard, and this is where Mus'ab ibn Umair was stationed. And he was able to teach Islam very freely and openly as compared to what was happening in Makkatul Mukarramah. In Makkatul Mukarramah, there was a lot of hostility, there was a lot of opposition, there was a lot of struggle. But in Medina, because the people were familiar, remember what I explained to you, that the year before there were 6 people who accepted Islam. And they continued creating awareness around Islam and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then a year later, Mus'ab ibn Umair came. So they were familiar with the message. They were familiar with the concept of Iman. They were familiar with the concept of a divine book and a prophet. So they were very open to accepting the message of Islam. That's one thing. The other thing is that some of the key figures or the leaders within the Yathrib or within the Medina tribes accepted Islam. And you know that when leaders accept Islam, naturally everybody else will follow suit and follow in their footsteps. So there were some positive developments that took place when the first batch of Muslims came back to Medina, the 12 men, the 2 women, and they came back to Medina and they continued with the effort. And they made a lot of effort to the point that 200 plus people had accepted Islam. Now they return back to Mecca. But this time round, they are returning with 70 plus people to meet the Prophet of Allah, also on the occasion of Hajj, and also in the cover of the night, and also coming with the intention to take the Prophet of Allah and invite him, to formally invite him now to come to Medina, to migrate from Mecca, to leave Makkah al-Mukarramah, and to come away with his companions. So this is basically how the events took shape in Madinatul Munawwara. When we look in the next program, we will be discussing how Mus'ab ibn Umair was able to influence key figures, where he was able to influence key figures in Madinatul Munawwara, the likes of Usayd ibn Hudayr, the likes of Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiyallahu ta'ala an. These were leaders of their tribe, the Banu Abdul Ash'al tribe. And when these 2 leaders converted and came into Islam, everybody around them accepted Islam. The majority of the people, or we can say in every household of Medina, somebody accepted Islam, and the numbers were growing. And within a short span of time, within 1 year, 200 plus people had accepted Islam. So in our next program, we're going to discuss how these 2 leaders of Medina, Sa'd ibn Mu'adh and Usayd ibn Hudayr, how these 2 people accepted Islam and what happened thereafter. So continue following the program and the journey of the Prophet ﷺ as we uncover more and more aspects of his life. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen.